gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Ashwini Vethakan, and joining us this week on Talking Business is the President of the American Chamber of Commerce, Presantha Jayamaha. Welcome to the show, Presantha. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice being here, Ashwini.
Presantha, could you outline the latest developments on FDI and trade between the US and Sri Lanka?
The first being that the US is Sri Lanka's largest buyer of goods and services. And it's over $3 billion in net exports from Sri Lanka go to the US, a total of 30% of our entire export basket to this one country. Whilst we only import $400 million worth of goods, roughly $400 million of goods and services from the US. So, I mean, it's a great trade relationship, but it's the imbalance, is a significant imbalance of about $3 billion to the benefit of Sri Lanka. So obviously trading with the US gives us access to foreign currency. Our companies benefit significantly. We import very little from the US in that way, but they're a big buyer of our goods and services. This is not the same if you look at our other trading partners, and I want to touch on that because it gives you an understanding how important the US and Sri Lanka trade relationship is. If you look at, for example, India and China, they are we are net buyers of their goods. We export very little to those markets. So, I mean, and you're talking multiple billions of dollars of imports that we do, even particularly from China. So the imbalance that we have with the US, which is to our advantage, we actually offset that by our trade relationship with China and India, because we are a net importer from them. And it's a complete advantage to those big nations because they export significant number of goods into Sri Lanka and technically buy very little from us. So your question was to do with the development. Yes, it is. And the trade between Sri Lanka and US, I mean, it's growing. It's a significant trading partner. It is the largest trading partner. And it's a highly advantageous to Sri Lanka for the number of reasons that I mentioned here. Let's discuss about trade during COVID-19. I mean, most of the local companies had some lockdown, had issues to face in terms of restarting operations. Maybe industries like, for myself, the hospitality industry are still locked down. But it's interesting that the apparel and software sectors did very well and continue to function and actually boom in this environment. And this is also initially because our manufacturers pivoted to PPE and other goods, and now have gone back to traditional apparel exports. But the main buyer here is the US. They continue to buy even during the COVID-19 and lockdown. So it's pertinent to note here that that US consumer market really dictates a lot of our export opportunity for Sri Lanka. And our number of top 3 or 4 of that market in terms of apparel and software and other goods and services continued during COVID because there was so much consumption and orders coming from the US markets. So, we see this that due to a trade alignment that is happening, realignment is the right phrase there, between China and the US. There is some supply chain shifting that's going to take place. I'm going to touch on this later, but there is some supply chain shifting that's taking place in the ASEAN and SAARC region, and it's accelerated because of COVID-19. So, we are very, very lucky to have a good relationship with the US in that way, in terms of being them being a net buyer of our goods. In terms of FDI, 2020 was a tough year for FDI in any nation, in any country. Our airport is closed for most of that year. And according to preliminary figures, we did about $500 million, down significantly from the previous years on FDI. But it's important to know, without looking at that 2020, if you look at maybe the longer period of time, we have some very interesting and successful US companies that operate here and have invested in Sri Lanka. For example, Coca-Cola, we have Uber, Pizza Hut, Best Western, Marriott Hotels, North Sales Manufacturing, Every Denison, to name a few. These are companies that have come and set up operations here, either operating locally, regionally, or by exporting back to the US. And even as we speak, currently there is a company by the name of New Fortress Energy that's announced that is negotiating to purchase 40% of the government stake at the Keralapitia power plant and set up a floating gas storage, a couple of $100 million investment there. The relationship is strong, it's growing. We have, as a we also have to recognize, I think, the most important thing and appreciate the role that the US market plays for our export businesses. And I think that alignment and that understanding is what is important. So but we do require larger investments coming to Sri Lanka from the US. The AmCham, CCC, BOI are all working on this. It's important to have these big brands and big companies moving in.
What are the most significant government initiatives oriented towards encouraging more FDI inflow lately?
Good question. So government initiatives, again, this question is obviously in this environment of COVID and restrictions, there's not much you can do. But I would like to say that my view is that BO has played a very significant and aggressive role, and at least effective in this environment under these circumstances to attract FDI to Sri Lanka. I mean, for example, on the country marketing side, the Sri Lanka Investment Forum that happened I believe in June, was a 3-day virtual summit. I mean, there was over 2,000 registrants. Some of those registrants were, portfolio managers, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, development, and even companies. The AmCham itself had many of our members, global members, who wanted to come and listen to what was the opportunity available. That was a great thing to do. People were, there are COVID restrictions. You can't really travel into the country, so let's take the message out. So I think those are very proactive and interesting vehicles to get the message to continue to say that Sri Lanka is here. We are waiting to start to do business with you. In terms of the GOSL, the government, the investor benefits are quite attractive to invest in Sri Lanka. We have good tax benefits. I think the corporate income tax of 0% for agro and farming, IT is taxed at minimum, I think non-existent. So I think the overall policy itself is very attractive, and I think our vehicle of attracting investment in Sri Lanka, the BOI, is doing its best under these circumstances. It's also pertinent to note that in terms of logistics and availability and locations, recently I've been told that the pharmaceutical zone has been opening in Hambantota. I've not been there. I've obviously heard about it. Related infrastructure being put in to create a 400-acre zone purely for pharmaceutical manufacturing. So these are great things. It gets a good, strong message out that we're going to continue to attract, we're going to continue to build. We are struggling to attract the big FDIs that are moving, to countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, India, Cambodia. The ASEAN SAARC region is attracting multi-billion-dollar investment. Sri Lanka is struggling to do that. So I'm going to end by saying I feel like the BOI and the GSL has done their best under this lockdown conditions. But if you're going to really invest and scale once these travel restrictions pick up, we got to have more long-term and consistent decisions.
In your opinion, what is Sri Lanka's medium-term outlook given the impact of the pandemic?
So I have a view on this. Please understand, I'm no economist, so what I share I will see from a business perspective and from a chamber, what we are hearing and reading about. So your medium-term outlook, given the impact of the pandemic, is your question. So but before the pandemic, let's go to the bigger event that happened, or not the big, another event that happened prior to that, which will be the Easter attack, April 2019. That had a significant shock on our economy, on our stock markets, in the hospitality industry. It disrupted things for maybe 4 to 6 months. Sri Lanka was crawling back into normalcy, and then COVID struck maybe 8 months later. Yeah, at early 8 months, we saw the signs of it. Nearly 11 months is a full-blown effect in Sri Lanka. But globally, we could see the signs from a tourism receipts point of view. From end of December 2019, we could see the drop in arrivals coming in. Yeah, so we've had two mini heart attacks, is a nice word to use. And so it's been significant shock to the economy. We have to be fair that these are any country would have struggled through it. So it's hit our little economy quite hard. From the data coming out of the country data is basically we've had a negative growth in 2020. Expected lockdowns, but however we see a recovery in 2021. There's been some economic growth that's coming in. The GOSL government, the government of Sri Lanka had to allocate additional funding to the health services purely to help the country come out of the pandemic, or at least maintain or continue through the pandemic. We've also done things like delayed tax payments and had to give debt moratoriums these debt moratoriums are still applicable to some industries. All that has been done, and obviously all the decisions are to help the nation, but also it affects the economy significantly. So it's a double-edged sword. It feels, it's not good in the long term. So due to this elevated fiscal deficit, the country's economic activity slowing down, we have a massive external debt, I think about 35 or 40 billion dollars. And Sri Lanka has a bit of it's considered to be a substantial risk category now for in terms of creditworthiness on international rating agencies. So that has a bit of a effect on in terms of FDI, and even if we are doing from the government point of view to do on the ISB sales. So we need to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of being called a Somalia or Afghanistan and no, I mean, or any other country. And I'm not trying to belittle the other countries, but to understand that Sri Lanka still has a strong brand, and it's in our interest to make sure that we maintain that reputation. That okay, we are in a bit of a muddle, we need to get out of it, but we need to get out of it with our reputation strong, because in my personal view, reputation, it takes forever to build, it takes a moment to lose. And I think if we can navigate the next, at least a short term and get a medium term, figure out how we're going to get out of this as a nation, as businesses, as keep our reputation intact, we should see a good upside coming in. See, the economy isn't as sick as it looks, in my view, but we are not far away from the cliff. So the economy is not as bad as it looks. It's pretty bad, but it's not as bad as everyone takes it to be. Where we are in default, but we are not far away from the cliff, especially if we don't take remedial action now. I think we are lucky enough to feel the heat of it. We need to figure out as a nation, as a government, as businesses, that we take remedial action soon. Prepare for the medium to long. Sri Lanka will get out of this if we are smart.
And on that note, we'll be going in for a short break. Welcome back as we continue our conversation with the President of the American Chamber of Commerce for Sri Lanka, Presantha Jayamaha. In your opinion, how effective are the intellectual property laws of Sri Lanka?
Thank you, Ashwini. Good question. So I'm going to speak on behalf of AmSham's view on this, because it's been one of our key advocacy areas. We've been driving this for maybe 2 decades. We've got involved in the IP space in Sri Lanka, IP laws. So we work with the government, we work with different government agencies, we brought in speakers, we've had legal papers written out, because intellectual property is big in the US at that time, and some of these big brands don't want to move to Sri Lanka unless our intellectual property laws are strong. When this started in the early 90s, there were nothing called intellectual property laws in Sri Lanka. Now, since then, the government has taken several steps, and we are very thoughtful and very, very apprehensive, very, very thankful of that, because there is now a developing IP system and protection laws in Sri Lanka. Some of the highlights was in the Property Rights Act of 2003, bought in copyrights, patent, trademark. So we had, it met the WTO obligations. The whole IP ecosystem has improved in Sri Lanka in the last few years, maybe last decade, accelerated. So there's been a recognition that intellectual property is a right, it is a property, it is an asset, it belongs to someone. So that conversation has happened. So I think the effective laws are available, the effective legislation is available. But what is shortfall there is the strategic policy, the coordination amongst entities in implementing and executing those laws. We still see a lack of that. So that's disappointing, because I think now the ecosystem is created, but implementation or execution of those laws are still taking time, or there's a lack of interest in doing that. So local agents of US brands, or the US brands themselves, and not the US, I'm talking regional brands, they have quite multiple concerns on the way that there's been pilferaging of IP law, IP items, or branding, regulations, software, movies, codes, whatever. It's been done here in Sri Lanka. So that's not good for business. It doesn't send a good message. In the 80s and 90s, it was accepted, but now it's not considered to be right. It's theft.
So do you believe they're adequate to encourage entrepreneurship and R&D?
So why do we need IPR? And that's, I'm sure someone in this audience will be wondering. So what, it's good. I can get my Armani T-shirt here for cheap, or I can buy a fake software. But see, IPR also protects our industry, the Sri Lankan industry, and that's something to understand, because if your IPR regulations are strong, R&D moves in. If I'm a business owner, I have no problem, allocating 20% of my budget, a significant number to create intellectual property, to create patented technology, because I know it's protected, and that's very important. Even as a local business, I know, and I'm seeing this now in terms of a lot of our members and a lot of the conversations happening. Companies are allocating budgets to create intellectual property in terms of additives, in terms of creating better of their processes, increasing their software, the coding, creating apps and technology. But what you don't want to have is someone in your office just taking that on a flash drive or a dongle, or sharing that idea or selling that down the street, and that we need to protect. In most countries, that would be an immediate criminal offense and a jail term on top of a fine, and it's a huge deterrent. In Sri Lanka, talking multiple years of court cases and probably nothing much, unless a small amount will come out of it. But what has happened is an opportunity cost for that company that invested. It's an opportunity cost also for the time and everything, and it's a deterrent more than anything else, because of the lack of implementation of those laws. So intellectual capital is something that we need to protect, not only for global companies, for local companies. And I think the laws that we have in place are good and strong. We just need to implement it more stringently and without bias, and have a clear view that this is someone else's property. We need to respect it and create the environment for companies, Sri Lankan companies, to invest in significant part of their earnings and resources into creating intellectual property, creating technology, and bringing Sri Lanka and what we do to the forefront regionally and globally.
Our final question for this evening, Prasantha. In today's business climate, how important is networking? And what are the possible networking opportunities for professionals aspiring to climb the career ladder in Sri Lanka?
Networking is important for any career or profile development. My suggestion is that everybody joins AmCham and come for our networking events. On a serious note, network allows access. At the end of the day, it gives you opportunity, access that you're not able to find on your own. Your network has your potential to provide you with insight to different fields, to give you leverage to people, for employees to find the right employees, for getting the right meeting at the right place. And that's a very important thing. There's even a word that says your network is your net worth. So, and if you break that question into a few portions, so I think networking is a crucial part of any entrepreneurial business, even career, any journey, whether it be out of the corporate world, is important, because humans are social creatures. And I think we do best when we are interlinked to each other, and we are interlinked to each other's strengths.
Well, this has been an insightful conversation, but unfortunately we've reached the end of our segment. Thank you for joining us on the show this evening, Prasantha.
Pleasure, Ashwini. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed. I hope you and the team have been blessed with what I've shared. Thank you.
Coming up, we have the latest updates from Sri Lanka's burning issues. Stay tuned.
You love the feeling of being renewed. To stay beautiful every single day. To breathe just like we do, because you are truly delicate, protecting the ones who've been with us through the years. With Sayalak Care, the only wood coating that truly protects you. Sayalak Wood Coatings from JAT.
Welcome back to the show, and here's an update on Sri Lanka's burning issues. As Sri Lanka's immunization campaign gathered pace and the travel restrictions imposed across the island gradually eased in July, fewer respondents to the latest LMD Nielsen IQ Business Confidence Index expressed concern about the pandemic compared to the last 2 months. With the virus caseload continuing to decline when the exclusive survey was conducted in the first week of July, 80% of survey participants said the impact of the pandemic was the most pressing issue for business in Sri Lanka today, down from 93% in the previous month. Furthermore, while inflation continues to be cited among the main issues affecting the corporate sector, 65% of those polled perceive it as a concern, in contrast to the 70% who said so in June. Political instability is also considered to be among the major problems faced by businesses, according to 29% of respondents. As for the most pressing national issue facing Sri Lanka at this time, the spread of COVID-19 remains the main concern in the opinion of 76% of respondents, compared to 92% in the preceding month. Meanwhile, 58% of the survey sample consider the economy to be an area warranting concern from a national perspective. That's a decline from 64% in June. As for the most pressing national issue facing Sri Lanka at this time, concerns about bribery and corruption continue to grow, as cited by 46% of those consulted by the pollsters, followed by per capita income at 21% and fears about the breakdown of children's education at 20%. And that's all the time we have for you this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.